Hello, welcome. Crafty Nihilist is back in the house, back in the kitchen, as it were. Lovely to see you. Thank you, Johnny Fettler, Whisperoon Pete, DJ B2. Good to see you all, guys. It's been a while, but trying to do these a little bit more regularly. So yeah, how is everybody? How in the dark winter months in the madness are we all? So the subject of the live stream tonight is very broadly words, but very many different aspects of it. And I want to start off with a bit of a tangent, which might hopefully will come to be revealed as I go on with it. But I was very interested. I don't know if other people saw. It was in the media just in the last couple of days about a big discovery, apparently, in Orkney, in the Nessa Brodgar, which I've discussed before in different talks and various bits and bobs. So this site, very important site of Neolithic settlements or different constructions which were around the period 3000 BC, that sort of period, about a millennium, so over 1,000 years that they were using this site, the Nessa Brodgar, which is on this isthmus, this amazing location in the main Orkney Island. And this Nessa Brodgar site is between the stones of Steness there in the background there on this picture, and the Ring of Brodgar, which is one of the biggest stone circles in the country, if not the world. And this recent news that's broken is that they have done this ground penetrating radar survey, all these new techniques which we're hearing a lot about, things like the analysis of the Giza pyramids, which seems to show all these very interesting, what could potentially be massive construction tunnels, all sorts of different, well, potentially all sorts of things that people are wondering what these images are showing deep underneath the Giza pyramids. They've been using this ground penetrating radar in lots of different places and finding evidence of fascinating structures that have always been uncovered up till now, still, beneath the earth, but this radar is picking them up. This is a picture of them actually doing this ground penetration radar. It looks very unscientific and just going around, but I quite like it in a way. It looks very much just like the farmer going around the field in the Orkney Islands. But I don't know if you remember, just dragging this equipment behind it, which is covering the area and doing this deep scan. I don't know if you remember me talking about was it just last year? I guess it was, when I went to the Orkney Islands in July, and it was the very last week when they were doing these excavations around the Nessa Brodgar, and they'd been doing it for about 20 years, uncovering all these amazing things. But then they decided that they were going to cover it all up and just make it back into a field. All this sort of stuff about, there's still, they've uncovered a lot which they still need to analyze, which they can keep on doing, but they were going to try and preserve it for future generations, and maybe people will come back another time, extra technology, and further the dig. I don't know. I was said at the time I was a little bit suspect about the things. Just, hi, Green Tea, good to see you. I was a bit suspect about these things. Just, I guess, my conspiracy theory head on, when it was aligned with things like hearing about Göbekli Tepe and about how they were stopping doing any further excavations there. And then also connecting with something which I hope to talk about more, maybe on another live stream, talking about Maria Wheatley, the great Maria Wheatley, who's very passionate about this, Thomas Sheridan as well. But what they're doing in now to restricting access to ancient sites, whether it's just a small stone circle or the much bigger sites, in terms of things like making places like Avebury, which is so great in comparison to Stonehenge, for instance, where you don't have to pay. It's just the village is in the middle of it, and these stones are there. You can just wander around whenever you want. And now there's permits that people are supposed to have to apply for, and I think probably pay a bit of money for, through like is it the National Trust, but anyway, they have to permits that have to be given to do. Gary Robinson, fantastic to see you, my friend. They have to do these, pay for permits. So it's just a further regulation, and then you sort of wonder. This is to guide people around the stones. So you wonder just where it's going. It just seems, in another sense, with all the other things going on, that this is another clamping down of freedoms. And also, in terms of the ancient sites, it seems to me, because I do think it's very much a link there with what happened millennia ago with what's happening now. There are a continuum of things, and that's what I hope to go about with this live stream in a way. So I was struck, this whole thing, they stopped these excavations, and they DJ, you say the UN and the World Economic Forum giving the orders to cover up the site. Well, that may be, I don't know. There's certainly Bright Insight did a lot around Göbekli Tepe, and the Turkish billionaire who the company he owns has the rights around Göbekli Tepe and making that into this visitor center. So there are connections there because he's on the World Economic Forum. So there are connections there. I don't know in terms of Nessa Brodgar particularly, but like I say, I just get suspicious. But then this thing came out in the mainstream media, articles you may have seen, and they were saying it's all connected to the Time Team, which for those not of this country was, I think it was on Channel 4. It used to be like it's like a history program where archaeologists go there, and it's like a TV funded thing, and they're all, investigating different historical sites and hopefully uncovering some information that was never there before type thing. And it was led by this actor, Tony Robinson, who people in the UK will know as Baldrick, of course, in The Great Blackadder and other comedy series. But the Time Team, apparently they did a program previously around the Nessa Brodgar years ago, and they funded this survey. And apparently they're saying, but they're keeping very cryptic about what it is that they've found or potentially have found on this radar survey. But they're saying they found something that doesn't correlate to the kind of sites that they've already uncovered. It's something beyond this wall that was sort of around the sites that they previously uncovered. But they're keeping it under wraps, obviously, because it's being funded by this. I think they're not sure they're actually on the TV anymore. Time Team. They might. I think I read that they're actually sort of YouTube, etc. So just like an online thing potentially. I don't know, but obviously they're coughing up the money for it, so they want to make a big special about it, which they're doing next year when they're going to re-excavate, but just this specific site. And so they're saying it's only a small area, and they think that they're going to be able to do it, without in a short duration of time, and it won't involve uncovering any of these other excavations. Well, Nephilim bones, six-fingered skeletons, who knows? But it's funny that on the article they've got this picture of them supposedly seeing these images, these people that are involved with the archaeological dig, and looking suitably like, ooh, doesn't look at all posed at all. But, you know, this is supposedly, oh, look, you know, this is what they're seeing, what we're not going to let you see yet. But this is, they've seen something that's really making them stand out, like, wow, this looks amazing. It could, of course, all just be hype. But I'm interested about this because, well, obviously it's Nessa Bagar, and I went there, and I was really blown away by the site and the location of it. Just some things where they're hinting about what it might be. They're saying there's a well-defined, discrete nature of this feature that they hope that they can just do with a small excavation to uncover. Excavation will also prove invaluable to ground truth the GPR results and assist in the interpretation of the rest of the data, not just for the NES, but globally. So they're pushing it as being something of global significance. Now, also, and this will what caught my eye, and this will lead into what I'm talking about in further in this live stream, because they talk about how this particular thing that they uncovered on this radar, how it stood out. They were talking about, here we go. It was unexpected to say the least, a form of the feature that seems totally at odds with what we are used to seeing at the NES, a site that can, a site, he's talking about the NES as a whole, a site that can be seen to be defined by straight lines and rectangular forms from the architecture down to the art. So they're saying this is something that's different. And I thought that jumped out at me, because they're saying that normally the site is about straight lines and rectangular forms, these constructions as you would expect in terms of a building in a sort of rectangular shape. And a lot of the art that you see there is you know, is like zigzag lines and that sort of thing. So it's like a geometric shape, patterns and that kind of thing. Now, this jumped in my mind because I've only just literally, I don't know if anyone's seeing, because let's put a link up on here on the channel, but I did an online talk for the Earth, Sea and Sky conference, which is like part of the Welsh Occult conference, which was a physical conference in Cardiff, and also online talks, which I was very pleased to be able to do one. So to do one. So I did this talk, and I'm going to use some parts of it again today, and just to go through, because what I'm talking about within this, sorry, I've lost my cursor. It's a curse. Because the point of my discussion on that lecture, I mentioned Orkney and I mentioned the Nessa Bogar, and I started by showing this, talking about this very small stone, which is only about 10 centimeters across. Now, this was found at the Nessa Bogar, and it jumped out at me at the time. I got the book that they've done from all the excavations they did, like I suppose if you like an anniversary book with lots of nice glossy pictures of the sites and of the things that they've uncovered. But they said also within that the inscription, in contrast to the others shown in the book, which are predominantly lines and crosses, is of a circle with a round indentation in the middle. So if you like, a dot in the middle of a circle. So could be like an eyeball, the moon in front of the sun, the nucleus in the egg, or perhaps a sun behind the sun. And this is very relevant to what I was going to be talking about. Gary, thanks for popping in, my friend. Thanks, good to see you. And yeah, have a listen back. Thank you. So yeah, now the Nessa Bogar, this is a photo I took when I was there on this final week of the excavations. they make a big point of saying that they're not going to be opening up the excavations they've already done. None of this stuff that you see in the photograph is going to be re-excavated, revealed again. People can still go again to this new excavation they're going to do next July. You still can go and visit it. But yeah, it's only going to be on a small scale. Now, the archaeological consensus seems to be that the Nessa Bodgar was a ritual site which would hold large gatherings from the surrounding area, where people would carry out rituals and celebrations. There is evidence of large-scale animal slaughter, but the constructions were seemingly not meant to be long-standing homes. This was a place where many people gathered for a short time and then left. The nearby ring of Bodgar, as I say, one of the largest stone circles in the country, in Europe, is thought to be where different communities, and then obviously these are all opinions, but this is the archaeological consensus, if you like, thought to be where different communities brought standing stones over many years, whether as some sort of initiation, a competition, some sort of community thing. And they believe, archaeologists believe, the end goal wasn't a meticulously planned megalithic site of intricate alignments, but it was the activity itself in erecting the stones, which was an end in itself. So I was just sort of postulating, if the goal of the builders of Bodgar was the placing of the stones in an upright position, in a circle, I was arguing this is an example of inscribing the land. And I'm extrapolating this out, that these are the beginnings, if you like, of writing, because this is a writing on the earth, it's an inscribing the earth. And like many of the Neolithic sites, an essential part of what they're trying to inscribe is bringing the masculine and feminine in harmony. Now, as an echo of that's gone on for centuries, there was a later stone, sadly blown up by a mad farmer in one of these ways that so often happens with destruction of ancient sites. But there was a stone named Odin's stone. Again, you got this overlapping of much later mythologies, because the Vikings then settled in Orkney, and so it became known as Odin's stone, although it's obviously much earlier, from the Neolithic time. And that Odin stone was positioned by the stones of Steness, which we saw in the distance on that earlier photograph, further down from the Ness and Ring of Bodgar. But this was used by local villagers for the binding of their oaths of marriage. And this suggests a deep unconscious remembrance millennia later of the significance of the site for an entwining of the divine, cosmic, masculine and feminine, the sun and the moon, the heavens and the earth. But the importance, this Odin stone had a hole in it, had a circle gap within it. And I think that's where the courting couple for centuries would join hands within that hole, within that stone, and that would be where they would say their oaths. And within a stone circle like the Ring of Bodgar, the spaces are between the standing stones and in the middle of the circle. So what I'm arguing is the space in the circle, the O, is charged with the energy of the standing stones, the I representing the sperm, the straight line, particularly when the sun's rays touch them and cast penetrating shadows into the potential of the space inside, a whole with the potential to be whole. And the space within the symbol, within the words that will later be formed, is a womb for the potential, with the potential for life. And, I was struck by this, as I say, this small, tiny stone, which is a circle with a dot in the middle, and I'm going to go on to more of that, the significance of that as a magic symbol. As you say, green tea, it's a symbol found on so many continents. So this time team thing, this radar thing, it may turn out to be nothing like this, but I'm just intrigued. As I say, it mentioned it in the book that this was very different to all the other engravings, markings that they were finding around the site, which were straight lines, diagonals, that sort of thing. This was a round circle with a dot, another circle, a hole in the middle, if you like. And now they're saying that this survey has found something which doesn't conform to the rest of the constructions that they've previously been digging out in the site, which were straight lines, rectangles. So this suggests to me they're suggesting that this is a circular shape. You know, that's what it immediately. Maybe I'm just yeah, I'm going to go into the meaning, green tea. Thank you. No worries. So I'm just wondering, is there a correlation here? And as I say, this just landed just after I'd done this talk, which is obviously then was me going back to things that I'd looked at the Nesbagar Budgar in the past. So, and then the idea as well of the, if you like, a hole within, if you, and you can put that into, make that into sort of like a womb, symbolizing the womb as well. This idea of the sort of potential of something, a space within which can become life. You have that as well in the cairns, as they're called in Scotland, long barrows in England, and there's plenty of these in the Orkney Islands. This is the most famous one, Maeshal, which is very close again to that isthmus where you've got the stones of Stanes, Ring of Bogar, and the Ness of Bodgar. And this Maeshal, like Stony Littleton Long Barrow near here, and West Kennet Long Barrow also down the road by Avebury, has its entrance aligned with the rising of the winter solstice sun. So the new rays of the sun, as it begins its ascent, not just on that winter solstice shortest day, but through the yearly cycle, which will begin the gradual lengthening of the days after the shortest day. So the cairns and long barrows are symbolic wombs within the earth. Although they're not underground, they're covered with earth and other natural materials, constructed mounds, artificial hills in the landscape. So the chamber within the cairn is symbolically a womb where the earth mother is penetrated by the sun. And often, debate, you know, not all of them. So I don't think these cairns and long barrows were just made as tombs, as burial places, but often they were places where the dead were entombed. So the space of death, the void, the darkness. So that's also the nothingness out of which creation of new life can be renewed. So I think very much this alignment with the solstice sun, and I've talked before about the importance of the winter solstice, which is obviously coming up very soon, as that being the most important time, because it's the real darkness when we go into the void. The days are shorter, it's the dark, it's the cold, when life really retreats in so many ways. And it's was seen, Tanishka was talking about how that was the basis for that was the Holy Grail, that was the ritual Holy Grail, was around the time of the solstice, and it was about guiding particularly men who didn't have the intrinsic connection with the natural rhythms, if you like, about guiding through that darkest time of the soul, if you like, when it's also nature's darkest time. And it's this renewal of life out of the darkest point that could be the dot within the circle. And I'm going to explain a bit more about that in a moment, how the importance of that dot within the circle is like as a primary symbol at the beginnings of language and the magic within that. But to keep with Orkney at the moment, and as again indebted to Green Tea for shouting out about Laird Scranton to me and what his fascinating ideas about Orkney. But he formed a theory on the symbolic importance of the watchstone, which is another one of the monoliths, again in this sort of same area, and also with these other stones of Stoness, relating it to the Dogon and the Buddhist system of cosmology, where, quote, the processes of the creation of matter begin with an act of perception that causes matter in its primordial wave-like state to ultimately behave like a particle. And this is very much like the reminiscent, obviously, of modern quantum physics theory. These processes are explained to Dogon initiates in relation to a specific method for the alignment of a ritual shrine called a granary, which Scranton views as a form of stupa. And that method, to quote Scranton, starts with a single point or gnomon, perhaps to correlate to this watchstone. A gnomon is like on a sundial, what the light or the shadow goes around. So that point around which things pivot and turn. And this single point and gnomon that was used to define the center of a circle. In mathematics, a point represents the simplest of geometric concepts. If, as is sometimes surmised, there had been a second watchstone at Stoness, the two stones together, taken as two geometric points, would have defined a line, as you join those 2 points, which is the next most simple geometric construct that relates to a stupa. This is my words now, this is a mathematical and geometric extension of these O and I symbols as the feminine and masculine principles. And I'm arguing, those O and I are the stone circles and the monoliths, the single monoliths, or the monoliths that are combined to make these stone circles. And so these basic, most basic geometric shapes, which must start with a point, and this is the basis of all our symbology. And again, it's all linked again to the masculine and feminine principles and about the creation of life from nothing, or from some base energy from which all life comes. And that's what I think that magic symbol, the circle with the dot, that is primarily what it's about, as I'll talk a little bit more as I go on. So the Odin stone, in its later interpretations at least, also carried within it the compression of death and new life, because although the hole in the stone had been used for centuries, where the young couples used to betroth themselves to each other, and that would be a step before marriage, and then mostly would lead to family, having children. It was presumed by many writers of the 19th and 18th centuries, don't think this is completely confirmed yet, to have been a place of ritual sacrifice, because it was believed the hole was roughly the size of a human head, and the marks on the stones were suggestive of bindings. So I suppose you would say that maybe coincided with a lot of, well, you could call it propaganda. There was a lot of sort of, if you call like Christian-based propaganda, that the pagans were into sacrifice and that sort of thing, and that was all, akin to devil worship. Although I don't think it's akin to devil worship, I think there is a lot, even a lot of even independent researchers that agree that there is a lot of evidence that there was human sacrifice that happened in a number of Neolithic and later pagan societies. So I think it did go on. I mean, there's some arguments about, I suppose, certainly in a lot of cases, because people would have thought it was a way of, transcending and going to a greater state, that they might have been willing victims for the sacrifice. But these are all things, of course, we're talking about millennia ago. We can't say these things for sure. But yes, but there is an entwining there of death and life, because it became for centuries this place that was a symbol of people getting married and having children, having families, and this continuation of life. So again, and this, as I say, was very close to my Shao in this deeply symbolic place. So I think the crucial thing was that there was this combination of the power of life with the power of death, and these things were intricately entwined. And I think, again, this is the basis of our language, and it does continue now. It continues, into our symbols today. Now, this is always a bit, and I know it's like it's a French philosopher, and it's sort of poncy word, but I think a lot of it does coincide with what I'm just talking about. But there's a French philosopher, Jacques Derrida, and he followed this other guy, Saussure, who was talking about how our language now is made up of all these empty symbols in a way that they don't intrinsically mean anything. The words in a language, it's just a language system. It's just designated that this word blue means the color blue, and we just know that that's the case, but there's no intrinsic connection between the word and the thing that it names. But out of that, Derrida, he's got this theory of deconstruction, but he wrote this quote: "Death strolls between letters," and it's like this great dramatic quote, and I put that in my PhD, and I was like, whoa, death strolls between letters. It sounds like really dramatic. And hello, I'm afraid I can't, lots of numbers and letters, but it's great. Goodly evenings all to you too. Great to see you. And yeah, death strolls between letters. But I think, as I say, I think there's a direct correlation between our language now, the symbols that we use there, and what they were doing in the Neolithic times. And death does stroll between letters, because I understand it as there's this great nothingness, which is the blank page or the blank screen upon which we write. And in the case of Neolithic people, the landscape on which they constructed the stone circles and barrows. But of course, the different thing there is that the landscape is not blank, in that it's already full of material and immaterial things. It's already teeming with life. Perhaps in a way, as I'm going to get to later on, maybe that's part of where this separation that's happened increasing over the more recent times, where our language is becoming hollow. Because perhaps now, instead of inscribing on the natural world, and so the space within the words or within the symbols being something which is natural or cosmic, it's now is a blank page on a piece of paper, and now obviously it's on a screen. It's a virtual blank that we just type on, but these are all just, it's all just data code that streams across the internet maybe, or whatever, or it's stored virtually within a hard drive. The separation between the physical material, it comes further and further, it gets further and further away. So maybe now that whole that was pregnant with, that was nothing, but it was always pregnant with the potential for life to come out of it, now there's less of that. Now it is a void, and what comes out of it more and more is just deception and words that just confuse, deceive, control, manipulate. So maybe we're losing the positive flow of energy that was within those symbols, and as they were made when they were millennia ago. But those symbols, I think what we need to do, what I'm trying to say maybe, is trying to harken back to where it all came from. And if we can try and reinvest the magic, the power, the energy in a positive way into those language, the symbols that we use, And again, we know about how the powers that shouldn't be, with all their connections with esoteric knowledge, they know these things. They know how to use symbols and words to get the results that they want, to manipulate the public en masse to do the things that they want to do. And so we need to know ourselves, to know what they're doing, to counter it, and at least not be caught out in it ourselves. And then, yeah, if we can then direct the power ourselves for a positive way to help ourselves, to help the good, to survive and prosper. Because language is still what holds our world together. It's our human constructed world anyway. So, I mean, obviously the laws are written, plans are made for the layouts of cities, instructions of how to build things. Obviously that all includes diagrams and numbers, but still it's a framework of language and symbols that builds our world and controls it. It's the software for our existence. And of course, I've used a computer analogy there, and that's appropriate in that now, in the technological world that we're in now, it's the codes that used to run computers and AI, and that they are numbers, but they are referred to as languages. So this virtual world, I think, well, it is a continuous, unbroken lineage that's come from the Neolithic sites around the world. But yeah, it not only defines the material world, how we actually construct things that are around us. As I say, it's also frames laws, but it's also the framework of our narratives of history, mythology, religion, politics, the things that define us, the belief systems, ideologies that govern the majority of our thoughts. It's difficult, as has often been spoke about, to break yourself away from everything, all the narratives that obviously that's the big thing for people in our, if you want to call it a community, but a loose community, but just people who are questioning it. And it's like so much, you find all the different things that you used to believe in, whether it was a rock band or whether it was a piece of history or whether it was a political party that you thought, oh yeah, they're going to sort things out for us. And yeah, we get defined by these things, and it's so difficult to break out. And people talk about the matrix, and that is through language, and as has been mentioned, and you've got all these things that, gematria and all these, and I'm going to go back in mention a minute into Hebrew, but other languages as well, where there's a numerical basis also within the words, or the symbols of the writing. So that even more is if you like, language as a code. But just simply in terms of words, what we deal with day to day, again, that funny French bloke Derrida said something like, there is nothing outside text. But we know on one hand what he's talking about, that our world is defined by that. But again, there is something beyond. There is something beyond the symbols. There is something beyond the material world, and that, I think many of us would feel that, and that's what they're trying to deny, of course, in saying, oh, it's total materialism and there isn't anything beyond that. But even then, in their scientism, they talk about quantum physics and things like that. So even then, there's this void in which, in terms of the material, what we can perceive, it's nothing, but within it, there's universes of stuff going on. Oh yeah, Pete, good point. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, our perception of reality is governed by a native language. That is very interesting, and I think they looked at some Native American tribes, the Hopi, I think, particularly talking about their language, the words they use to express time, and saying that influenced their philosophy or their whole world of thinking. And that's been largely, I was going to say debunked. I'm not saying it's not true, but in terms of, I suppose you again would call them materialist in terms of those the modern linguistics. And Noam Chomsky is one of the founding fathers of that. And then we, of course, know what he then became a political activist, and then many of what he wrote makes sense again when he talked about the manipulation of was it consent, something of consent. But then, of course, during the whole lockdown and that, he came out and said, "Oh, you got to jab everyone up, and if they're not jabbed, they shouldn't be allowed in the supermarkets or this and that." So he totally proved himself to be a complete wanker of the agenda. And he was one of the he in his beginnings, if you like, of prominence, he was a founding linguist, a founder of this theory that something about pedos. But yeah, he was he was his hypothesis, if you like, or it's now generally consensus of opinion, is that there are innate within us some certain building blocks of grammar, and that these are found all around the world. All right, I'm hearing a voice from outside that Chomsky was on the Epstein list, so he's another one of those. It's difficult. At the moment, I think it's just me and my wife that aren't actually on the Epstein list. I think they would actually be better if they just released a list of people who didn't have any involvement with Epstein, because that probably that would probably be a much shorter list. Asset DJ, manufacturing consent. Thank you very much. But oh, perhaps my wife was there. Oh, okay, just me then. So, but that's an interesting correlation, actually, when talking about this and about language, because maybe that will be a good subject for a future podcast, etc. Because there's another modern linguist who's very prominent, who's written books. I think The Language Instinct was one, Steven Pinker, and he was caught up with the Epstein thing as well. Although, what?
His book was called Manufacturing Consent.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, manufacturing consent. Yeah, we know what kind of consent he was trying to manufacture. So, yeah, Steven Pinker, I remember he was defending himself because he was caught photographed with Epstein. Although I don't know if anything has come out since. As far as I saw, the photograph, he was just photographed at public events, like with other people around him and Epstein. And he was just like, well, it was just, I was at this public event, and then this guy comes up, and it's like, how it is. It's just like, everyone just take a photograph of this guy, everyone's sort of schmoozing and stuff. And it's like, whatever it was, an award ceremony or some public function. So I don't know. I'm not saying he was involved any deeper than that, but it does show, as you say, DJ, a lot of academics PD files. But Epstein, of course, he made a big thing of, apart from politicians, actors, royalty, and all these business people and everything else, he also made a big thing of getting scientists in, a lot of scientists, and he had all these connections with all these things he was trying to do. Jason Burns has talked about this ranch, which was also one of these properties that they haven't fully investigated, or things haven't come out. Everything talks about the island, but this ranch, he was having this plan where he talked about this plan of trying to impregnate loads of women and try and get some genetic copy of himself and all this sort of thing. Anyway, going off at tangents, but it's interesting that these are maybe ideas again of how they're using language as a control, because the Chomsky idea, it's got some basis that maybe can be used to reinforce in some ways what I'm about to talk about, because it was saying that there was an inherent basis of language within the body as we were born. So the idea that I think from Locke and others often is that we were all a blank slate when we were born, and there wasn't anything carried over inherent within us in terms of things like language and thought. But then this Chomsky idea, as I say, he found what he said were some sort of building blocks of grammar that were found all over the world in communities that had no connection with each other, their languages, how they built up. So he said there were a few certain grammars which were inherent to the human. So that in itself, some have argued, is, if that's true, then that is a counter to, again, this sort of Saussure, Derrida type of idea where that language is empty and it's got no intrinsic basis in material life, or you know, and if they're saying, well, language is actually something that comes out and is intrinsically part of us at basis. So then is it really this alienating thing, which all this modern theory stuff coming out of this idea that language is empty symbols? It's that language is actually, it's alienating. It's because it's not part of us. It's not intrinsic to, it's not got an intrinsic connection to the world. And the thing is, it has become that. But I think what I'm trying to argue is that there's a balance. It wasn't always about that. It still doesn't have to be about that. And I believe at basis there is an intrinsic connection between words and symbols with actual life and also what's beyond life. But how it's become and how it's being used and made is it's being made into something that's alienating and destructive and makes people conflicted and damaged inside, as well as societies conflicted and damaged. And that has been created through language, but not just language on its own, of its own volition, if you like, not because of something inherent language, but how it's been used and manipulated. So yeah, I've had a little bit of a ramble off, but it's all part of the plan. So there've been a couple of great articles recently in the Light newspaper about the importance of language in the battleground now of our current society. One by David Charalambous refers to semantic drift, where governments and institutions, along with special interest groups, have changed the meanings of words. And we all know, we can all come up with loads of different examples of that. So the words no longer mean what they used to. And many of these meaning changes have been deliberately used to undermine society, families, and ultimately an individual's sense of self. Charalambous, you might hear Godspeed possibly in the background, which will get really dramatic, and it actually could be like a bit of a soundtrack to what I'm getting on about. So I quite like it as a background theme. If you can hear it coming through, I hope you enjoy it and it doesn't disrupt. So yeah, this is how it has been. These changes, they deliberately undermine society, families, and ultimately an individual's sense of self. Charalambous writes that the deliberate corruption of words undermines society's capacity for self-governance by impacting our ability to communicate ideas. Only through rigorous defense of meaningful discourse and maintaining semantic integrity can democracies resist the slow suffocation of freedom by 1,000 semantic cuts. I'm just going to mention that was the Watchstone at Stoness, again in Orkney. I apologise, I didn't give it a little place there while I was rabbiting on. So this is a book by this guy, Silent Sigils by Mark Froud, just to mention it again. But in my novel, I describe a modern day world collapsing as language disintegrates. And it's like a version of the Tower of Babel, where people no longer understand each other, but also they no longer know what things are called, and their understanding of the world and how it works and who they are, the actual selfhood, all falls apart because things can't be named or described. And the language that they used to hold everything together and everything was built up with since they were kids, it's everything falls apart when they don't have the language. And in my novel, the collapse of language in this world is precipitated by a child from a future or parallel world who gets sucked into our time. The character is an embodiment of the lost child figure, which I wrote about in my academic book, The Lost Child. God, this is a plug for Mark. God, Mark, God, bloody get over yourself. The Lost Child in Literature and Culture. And I argued that the lost child is a rip in the fabric of our world, of reality, and this includes a void within language. And I also discuss in my book the very real, tragic, horrific losses of children. So I don't mean to trivialize that in any way by talking about things in this sort of abstract sense, but I do feel that language is perhaps a liminal level that's between the physical and the spiritual, and that the loss of a child breaks a barrier between these realms, and it's like a ghost in the machine, if you want to call it, to use a phrase. And you get, that's why I think there's a lot of ghost stories, horror stories that focus on children, lonely, perhaps troubled child in the material world who can see and be contacted by ghosts, or where a child who's died is the ghost that haunts the physical world. And Derrida, again, this French philosopher dude, he talks about writing being ghostly, as once it's written, the moment it's written, it's already passed. And of course, in theory, writing can remain for centuries, to be read even thousands of years later, as the stone circles, etc., are there. Although for many, for most, there's still a bit of a mystery as to what they mean. But obviously, many people were trying to put it together, and some people feel that they do have a connection and they know within their heart, if you like, and spiritually what these things were for. You know, I want to shout again Maria Wheatley, because her connection with these places, as well as just a whole lifetime of being around these places, dowsing them, but a whole lot of material knowledge, if you like, going around, but also connecting with things spiritually. So I think she's one that has a very deep connection to these Neolithic sites and the people that made them. But writing as well, the writing language that we're used to can in theory remain around for centuries. And the oldest writing found is usually asserted to be cuneiform writing in Mesopotamia around 3200 BC. So that would be around the time of the Nesabodgar, around the inception of that. And again, just to mention, as I say in the book, Laird Scranton, he sees the Orkney Islands as having these sort of watchers, if you like, that were passing these knowledge on to people. And so then maybe that fits in with this idea of like the Ring of Bodgar being where the community is bringing stones together, and maybe they're getting instruction, and it's all to do with some formative formation of consciousness. And Laird Scranton thinks that these same beliefs from these people then are passage down to the Dogon, the ancient Egypt, and connecting all that up. So as I say, the cuneiform writing was in Mesopotamia around 3200 BC, but there have been claims that the so-called Tataria tablets, they were discovered in modern Romania in 1961, but they've got symbols inscribed in these examples by the Vinca culture, something I don't really know much about, but interested to know a lot more. I know Windows on the World talked about it, and these dates are around 4000 BC, and a number of people think that they are a form of language, which would make them the earliest that have been discovered. But because they've never been interpreted and there's no correlation that people have found with other proto-languages. So the consensus, the corpus of academia, hasn't accepted them as being writing. And obviously, and it's difficult to prove either way, of course, but it's like, well, they're a collection of symbols, and it's like, when do a collection of symbols become language or not? I mean, it's a collection of symbols, unless you just literally think it's just decoration, which I suppose that's maybe what some people are arguing. But it looks to me very much like how these early cuneiform writing are, with etching on tablets and stuff, and it's shapes and pictures and markings of lines and circles. I mean, this looks to me very much like those. So, and say, if people were collecting symbols that signify something to them, then surely that meets the definition for language. But anyway, that's an interesting point. But again, that's 4000 BC. So then, yeah, Derrida went on to discuss the uses of technology which extend this ghostiness, things like cinema, TV, internet, because these are projecting the images of the real, but just making it into 2 dimensions. And it's just representation on representation, and things become more and more ephemeral, less based in reality, you could say, or the material reality. Yeah, just a disjointedness. So the tablets that we used to have, or they used to have millennia ago, have now developed into the tablets of technology. Now, the second Light article, the Light newspaper, which came a little bit later, I think maybe that was just like the month or so afterwards, after the previous one that I mentioned. The second one was by Michael O'Cloone. Oh, thank you, Green Tea, for putting the link to the Silent Sigils. Available from lulu.com. Wonderful, thank you for that. So Michael O'Cloone's article, he refers to Saussure as talking about, came up with this idea of this, it's all an empty language system that doesn't have a intrinsic connection with anything. Quoting him here, the meaning of a word, what it signified, or in Michael O'Cloone's word, the meaning of a word, what it signified, is somewhat elusive. It can alter through time and culture. It can also mean several things at once, depending on who spoke it and who heard it. So this means the truth of a word or communication cannot be pinned down in the way that the psychopaths desire. So he was saying it really in a positive sense, that this, if you like, emptiness of something intrinsic to language, but the fact that it adapts and can change, you could view it in a positive way, that these people were now trying to pin down a new meaning to something and say this thing now means that, and you've got to believe it means that. They're trying to put an intrinsic meaning into a word, but Michael O'Cloone's saying that this is it's almost like a natural flow of energy, if you like. He doesn't quite use those terms, but he said it's always in a state of flux. Language, on essence, it is constantly creating. It will inevitably break out of the tyrant's imprisoning lexicon. Even the critical theory schools attempting a meta-language come up against language's paradoxical nature. And I find it interesting in the light of talking about this, when I'm getting all a bit spacey and cosmic man, about the void, a ground of all there is, as I like to refer to it, which is within and beyond language. O'Cloone refers to the critic and philosopher Slavoj Zizek, and he had a notion of sublimity at the heart of meaning itself. A sublimity is something, so that from sublime, a sublimity is something beyond human conception and representation. So if the truth behind the meaning of a word is sublime and therefore unapproachable, how can we, since we think and communicate linguistically, ever hope to control it. Following this, the truth underpinning and driving our thoughts must also be sublime. I mean, Occlune likened this to Freud's unconscious, but I think Freud's been so, you know, I'll probably get a shouting from the other room about Freud and perversions and all that sort of thing. But I would say a corruption of the sublime, because he made it, I would say, part of the agenda in many ways. What his theories actually led to part of this undermining of people and led to their destructive personality disorders, psychological damage in our society. I mean, just the dismissal of patients' description of abuse said that they were sublimated desires within the child. I mean, that, you know, at the heart of so much of the corruption, destruction of innocence that we've got now. But I think, to me, but this idea of the sublime, not thinking of it in a religious sense to me, but if, I don't know, however you want to see it, a spiritual sense, I suppose, that to me, like I'm saying, that I think there is this void that is the basis of everything, but also within language, that is something which is a spiritual ground of all there is, out of which all the material, all life can come from. So to me, I think that there is a connection there with what Occlune is saying. Occlune seems to be, his views, he talks about the sublime in terms of like Christian Abrahamic God. And he mentions the biblical proclamation from Genesis that in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God. So in his words, Occlune, Genesis states that God brought forth everything linguistically. And so for Occlune, it appears that this battle for narrative and discourse that Charalambous, the guy who wrote the previous Light article, what he alludes to is fundamentally linked to the spiritual battle between good and evil. God wants us to experience the wonder of eternal creation, while evil wants to imprison us with language by limiting it. Good luck with that one, he says. So he, on a positive sense, he views this eternal creativity as being ultimately uncorruptible, or it will always break free from the shackles that are trying to be imposed upon it. So I love that. I certainly hope that he's right. But yeah, we can't let them hold us down. And I think all these things are interlinked. We mentioned Freud, and Green Tea has talked about Freud's nephew being Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda to the masses. So there's a definite correlation with Freud's theories and this idea of manufacturing consent, to use Chomsky's terms. And I agree with DJ. I prefer Jung, and I think he is much more, as far as I can tell, no expert, but I did do a talk on him, as you'll find in the archives as well. But very much, again, talking about this, he's talking, I think, about this eternal creativity, this underlying consciousness within the collective unconscious, of course. So that, to me, again, can be connected to this ground of all there is. Again, I think that these are all connecting theories. I think there is something together with them. So where I was, I referred, talking in my the talk I did for the Welsh Occult Conference, going back to the this idea of there's being something intrinsic that was magical or spiritual, or, to use that word, sublime, within the earliest symbols that then became language. So I talked a bit about John Dee's book, another chap that I did a talk about before, and kept popping up on subsequent talks either, so fundamental to so much. His links with secret societies, these incredible scientists, but also, of course, all these the supposed the scrying he did with Edward Kelly, and just a really fascinating guy on so many levels. But I was interested to see that he did a book, this hieroglyphic monad, or the Monus hieroglyphica here, as you say in its original form, the title. So this is where he talks about this symbol that he created, the Monus hieroglyphica, and it's very much about, if you like, the intrinsic spirituality or magic inherent within symbols, within words, and how these can be used. So in the text there, he asserts that, quote, the first mystical letters of Hebrew, Greek, and Latin were issued by God alone to mortals. Dee stated there are specific reasons for the shapes of letters, their positions or places in the order of the alphabet, how they are bound together, and many other things that must be considered with regards to the primary alphabets of the three languages. And the shapes of all those letters derive from points, straight lines, and circumferences of circles. So here we are again, back to the circle. And sorry, I keep losing my cursor. There we go. And the shapes of all those letters derive from points, straight lines, circumferences of circles. The circle is perhaps the most significant, and this, going back, Green Tea, we're talking about the importance of that and what those symbols mean. The circle is perhaps the most significant as it commonly represents a unity of all, the oneness of things, and therefore the ground of all there is. That last bit of my words, but from this immaterial plane, the material manifests, which is represented by the point. And the extension, then, the point can be extended into a line. Also, I think I've mentioned before this book, or there's been a series of books. I've got a couple of them by M.B. Jackson, which I found fascinating. So this is Sigil Ciphers and Scripts, History and Graphic Function of Magic Symbols. M.B. Jackson writes in there, the symbolism of letters varies according to each alphabet, but all of their letters are designed out of 7 basic shapes, variations of the vertical line or sperm and the circle or egg. These 2 symbols, with which all literate symbolism begins, translate as I and O. I is symbolic of spirit and the masculine. O represents matter and the feminine. All other signs, symbols, and letters are the offspring of these 2 creative powers. So in these terms, language, my terms, thinking again around the child, the signs, language, the signs and symbols that we use to denote the written version of speech are the offspring of these elemental signs. In other words, they are the children of the primary symbols. They are born out of matter, the material from which the world, the cosmos, universe, everything comes from, and it requires the application of spirit to give the spark to animate the matter, to make a story, to give the matter life, move it through time. Now, I'm indebted to Jamie Arthur Pickup, who was one of the talkers at the Glastonbury Symposium. I did, when I went through my talk about the different speakers, I mentioned him there. So it was through him that and his talk that I found out about Dee's hieroglyphic monad, because although I looked at stuff about him, that had passed me by, and it's looking at symbols and language. So it's like, whoa, John Dee talking about symbols and language. My God, got to buy it. So Jamie Arthur Pickup in his book writes that the circle represents perfection, unity, and the infinite nature of energy. It's often seen as a symbol of spirituality, divinity, godliness, and the heavens above. And I was going to say, as Green Tea said, this is something which crosses many cultures. To me, this can all be seen as the nothingness, the void out of which everything forms. An extension of the basic circle symbol has, going back to Jamie Alpha Pickup, at the center of a circle, the source from which all things come and all things return, the 0 point. So and then we have that monad, the circle with the point in the middle. So well, the circle dot was used by the Pythagoreans and later Greeks to represent the first metaphysical being, the monad or the absolute. And this was originally conceived by the Pythagoreans as the supreme being, divinity, or the totality of all things. Also, some philosophers of the early modern period, such as Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, believe there are infinite monads, which are the basic and immense forces, elementary particles, or simplest units that make up the universe. That's interesting. I don't just really thought, actually, and I might be wrong on this, but I think Leibniz, because he invented a lot of calculus, and didn't he like come up with a lot of the things that are basis now for computer code, you know, talking about how the progression has happened that has gone from the Neolithic, if you like, for all these like magic symbols and these old esoteric philosophies and the arcane images and how they go into and they've become language and how they're used. And it was an influence on Leibniz, who then, with his calculus, what he came up with then became a big influence on where we are now with technology. I could be wrong on that, but I seem to think that was something that he was noted for. I think that there is, I'm not going to remember his name now, but just as an aside from that, there was it Tal? There was a guy who was one of these sort of like mad monk guys. I think he was maybe contemporary with Dee, might have been just a little bit earlier than him, but he was like a mystic, and he was supposedly had some vision on top of a hill. But a lot of things that came out of that, and these things that he talked about, again became a basis then for a lot of science and technology stuff into the computing, into the modern era. I'll remind myself of his exact name. I think I might have mentioned him on a previous talk, but it is interesting. Again, this idea where people say, you know, now it's all technology, materialism, hard science, and supposedly completely eliminating and the spiritual, the mystical, the magical. It's got no place, and it's completely anathema to the modern science. Increasingly, and obviously a lot of people like Rupert Sheldrake, who are very good, you know, incredibly intelligent scientists, but are also completely aware of there being a spiritual side and looking at bringing those things together. I think more and more that's being shown that that's the case, and it was always a erroneous and probably in many cases a deliberate vandalism of things to say that there's this complete separation between the material and something else that lies beyond it, and dismissing any other types of knowledge, perception, apprehension of things. And time and again, so much of what modern science is, and Dee himself, great scientist, also very much connected with the spiritual, the magical. these things are intricately connected. There is no division between them. So in Dee's book, the Monas Hieroglyphica, which Pickup referred to, he has, so I don't know if that's clear enough to read, but he had this theorem 1, the very first and most simple representation of not only existing things, but also things hidden in the folds of nature, and also in the exhibition of the bringing forth of light, is made by means of a straight line and a circle. Theorem 2, however, a circle cannot be skillfully crafted without the line. Likewise, the line cannot be crafted without the point. And I suppose that sort of thing, if you're drawing a line, it's from one point to another, and then, you know, to do a circle, like the thing, if you're just doing a drawing thing, if you can take the line up from the point, and then you can, if you've got like a piece of string on that sort of thing where you do a thing to draw a circle, it starts with a point, line, circle. Thus things come into being by way of the point and a monad, and things related to the circumference, regardless of how big they may be, so the periphery, cannot exist without the service of the central point. So again, that goes back to that thing, I suppose, the material, the surface reality that we have, it cannot exist, it cannot have been created, and we certainly can't manufacture it when we're building it, when we're making it out of artifice, without having these essential building blocks of the point, the line, and the circle. But what's on the periphery is intrinsically connected to what's in the center. And in a spiritual, philosophical sense, that is this ground of all there is. There is something, there is some energy. Well, we know even on the scientific level, there is an energy out of which everything comes from. Now, in Dee's world, or at least what he said in the text, he was saying that the central conspicuous point in the cosmos was the Earth, and everything revolved around the Earth, you know, including the sun and the moon and all the planets. I suppose you could say, though, from the point of view of the ancients, they're standing on the Earth looking up at the sky, and so the sun, the moon, you know, the heavens, the different constellations, they are revolving around the Earth, because they're seeing it going across the night sky at different times of the day and the year. It is revolving around them as a central point. So I suppose you could say that that's their perspective. From my perspective, with our understanding now of Earth's place in the cosmos, I look at the symbol of a circle around a point as being essential to the existence of things on the periphery, and see the Earth and the other planets circling the sun, and further our solar system and all the others rotating around the black hole at the center of the galaxy. I mentioned this in a previous talk. So many of the Neolithic and ancient sites around the world, from Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge to Giza pyramids, were built at least partly to trace the passage of the sun and other cosmic bodies. And my belief, as I've been saying, is that the stone circles and large monoliths, the menhirs of the Neolithic era, were the basis for the circle and the line, and therefore an origin of language. Dee himself, with his Monas Hieroglyphica, created a sacred symbol of oneness, or grouping of interlinked symbols which represent the sun. Actually, let's just go back to, it's on the cover of the book. So this is the symbol essentially. So I think he said that the circle with the dot was representing the sun, and then you've got the crescent shape there representing the moon, and then there's different things. It gets a bit esoteric, should we say, but representing the planets. And he asserted that within it, this symbol had a spiritual power. And to me, these These symbolic creations reaching back to those megalithic sites which track the movement of the sun and the moon across the horizon. And you've got a cross there underneath as well. So these sites were creating within and out of the Earth's landscape from the prima materia. Went on to say about the Greek, the lowercase Greek letter alpha. So the beginning of the alphabet on, Greek language, one of the civilizations which much of the modern world came from, or the philosophies were a lot of it based on the Greek. And this, he said, was made from the symbols for the moon and the sun, with the addition of a line from the cross in the lower half of his monad, which is the radius common to both. These states, we are the first to teach that its true and mystical proportion consists of a straight line, a circle, and a half circle, although it can also be made from just a circle and a half circle. D refers to the letter alpha as an artificial vessel. And so this highlights that a language is a construct, although at least originally it was designed to contain an essence of elemental forces. And the origins of writing are embodied in ideography. And that's this one of the things that M.B. Jackson talks about in his book. So ideography, the term formed from the Greek words ideo, meaning idea, and graph, to write. And M.B. Jackson describes how this science of magic symbolism includes the divine shape of letters which formed from a physical representation of its thematic character. So as I say, this is in contradiction, if you like, to this, what I used to study at English literature at university about this post-structural theory. Again, these ideas from Saussure and all this theory that language is arbitrary signs and that there was no intrinsic meaning to the words. And then from that, a lot of other theories has happened that language is alienating, that it creates the structures of society that restrict us and give us false senses of self, almost that it's something that's happened because of language. And as I say, I think, undoubtedly language has been devalued and it has been used to control and damage people. But that wasn't the heart of it, I don't think, or that there was something intrinsic right to the very basis, the origins. So it came out of the physical world while also encapsulating more profound concepts. The beginnings were the 7 elemental shapes. So let's go on to. So you've got 7 elemental shapes. You've got the dot, circle, half circle, crescent, if you like, the straight line, and then you've got vertical, then horizontal, and then diagonals. From combinations and derivations of these, signs developed that will become the letters of our and other Indo-European languages. For instance, the letter A, which is this one here. So this is an ideography from Jackson's book. So letter A apparently first signified air, so the first breath, diaphragm. So it's both a physical action and a reference to one of the elements. And maybe the sound of the letter, one of the simplest sounds to make, it's like an expression of breath. So the primacy of this first letter of the alphabet is brought down to earth, literally, as it used to be representative of an ox's head, or it could be interpreted as a plough. And the importance, the introduction of agriculture and animal husbandry to the growth of human civilization has been well documented. So this image, it sort of encapsulates that. It's both got the ox and the plough there. So you can look at the domestication of animals and the development of arable agriculture. And then look at these words from Jackson. The diagonal lines give a balance of forces or energies. The central dividing line gives balance between the upper spiritual world and the lower material world. It's a picture of a man standing well balanced on 2 feet. So I wrote, actually, to me, that makes me think of the magician card in the tarot, in the Rider-Waite, the one hand pointing up and the other to the ground. But I this is the first letter of the alphabet, and you've got a connection with the very material ploughing of the earth and animal life, and animals that then give life that we need. And this was one of the building blocks of modern civilization. But then you've got also within the lines of it, you've got an idea of a connection between an upper spiritual world and the lower material world. I suppose you could say also that's a bit that triangle. You've got like the pyramid form there. Green tea, yeah, you're right. It makes me think of the sound R in so many names for the divine: God, Ra, Allah, Buddha, Krishna. Quite good point. So, as I say, again, you've got the connection with the sky and the earth, and so many of these sites, going back to the megalithic sites, which I started with, proven their intricate correlations with the movements of the sun and moon and alignments with stars. Several significant barrows and cairns are aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. So I really think that these megalithic stones are the material basis of the eye, the line, and when the sequence of eyes brought together, they form a stone O, a circle. So it's the sun and moon, masculine and feminine, creation out of nothing. But now, just as sort of like going to show the separation and the violence, if you like, that's been done to this intrinsic connection with both the living material and the spiritual, and the breath that's inside us all, the creative spark. And where we've got to now, and where we've got to specifically in the last few years, I went back to a blog article that I used to do, a blog. I haven't written anything for ages, but the Lost Child blog, I think there's a link to it somewhere on the on our channel. But I wrote an article in December 2020, so that great year, and I called it The Language Virus. I again referred to my novel, kept trying to plug it, about how it's breakdown of language. And within that novel, there was this future world where people just didn't communicate with words. In fact, words were seen as being obscene, and like just to open your mouth and utter a sound was like considered like a taboo. But they communicated telepathically with images and emotions that they could transmit. To the people there in this time, language was synonymous with violence and deception. And so that's why it became a taboo. But then, I was reminded, I bring up a couple of supposedly, mainstream reports that happened that had just come out not long before I wrote this article in December 2020. And it just, I guess it's another one of these things reminding us of the utter insanity of the time. But of course, it's not stopped, and there's still insanity going on now. But these headlines: talking loudly in pubs is just as risky as singing for spreading coronavirus because they produce equal amounts of infectious aerosols. Study claims. Study claims. What a great phrase, a good connection of words there. Study claims. So someone just wrote something down and said, oh, this is a thing. And study claims, but it's like, my God, it's a thing. It's infectious. Oh my God. So talking loudly in pubs, that could kill people, basically. You bastard. If you want to talk loudly in pubs, you're killing people. And then another one, very similar time. So this was actually in August 2020. And then this one, I think it was actually from a quite significant date of September the 11th, but again, 2020. Speaking softly indoors could help save lives. Speak softly. You all remember, or try to forget, but it's worth remembering the sort of insanity that's tied up with supposedly scientific studies and everything else. But this this second article, it says that droplets too small for the eye to see are ejected while speaking. They evaporate to leave behind particles big enough to carry viable virus. So this puts the thought out, and of course the planting of thoughts is itself this invisible transmission that infects people's minds, that by speaking to someone you can be killing them or killing someone else in the future by passing on this virus, your infectious words, the sound, just speaking to someone, speaking too loudly, having conversations with someone too close, being close proximity on a social basis and exchanging language, the basis of communication. That is something that can kill people. You can kill people by speaking. And that reminded me of not just my own novel, but there's a really good film, actually, film better than the book, to be honest. There's a low budget film called Pontypool, based on a novel, Pontypool Changes Everything, by Tony Burgess. The novel is a bit of all over the place, but the film is really good. But it's like a zombie film, but the zombies are created. It's like a virus, but it's through language, it's through speaking that this zombification of people happens. Another great novel which I recommend, which is bonkers, but in a really well-written way, but still not quite sure what to make of it. I'll have to reread it. But Ben Marcus's novel, The Flame Alphabet, and there's a deadly disease which is transmitted through speech. So this came out a little while before COVID, so it wasn't something that was written in response to it. But there was a deadly disease transmitted through speech, and this is specifically through children. It's children speaking it. The children are immune from the damage of it, but they carry it somehow, and the children speaking it creates in the adults this infectious illness that can kill them. And so the adult authorities have children rounded up and taken to internment camps. And then this is in 2020 on this article, I mentioned this, and then this article, Army to carry out mass COVID-19 tests on children in Liverpool. Do you remember these? So that was in November 2020. I think it was one of these things where they sort of bluffed, and this all came out, and it was starting in Liverpool. No surprise, the surprise they chose Liverpool first, because that's always been like this place that's supposed to be a bit of a place where people like don't take no shit really, and they're anti-establishment, I suppose, for want of a better term. It seemed, they were picking on that first. I don't know. But then it says it's supposed to be carried on around the country, but I don't remember them doing this, thankfully. But again, it might be just another one of their threats. But this article was saying they've been carrying out testing of children in schools. At least one school told parents their children would be barcoded, and those who test positive secured. Just imagine, like, those terms, like they're going to put a barcode on a kid, say you're infected with this disease, and then you've got to be marched off into isolation somewhere. I mean, imagine being a parent receiving that letter. The school in question were forced to backtrack. And imagine being the kid faced with the army coming to their school, administering tests on them and telling them that they are infectious and need to be isolated from their friends and family. And these things are still repeat. I mean, there was another article in the Light by Dr. Michael Poulan, and there's been talk of the NHS planning to DNA test all babies to assess their disease risk. And yeah, it's and sorry, just lost my track there for a second. So yeah, DNA testing, all baby, and this would again be linked in with this idea of a digital everything. So everyone's on a database, and our DNA, which is a code, and yeah, green tea, even more demented since once we realised healthy children didn't get tragically ill. What do you? Sorry, which were you referring to? How do you spell that, green tea? But yeah, this again, it's this idea of encoding people and making them into a system that can be controlled, a DNA database for kids, all for the good of everyone's health, of course, so they can assess people's disease risk and help make people better and stop people getting serious diseases in life. Of course, it's all for the common good. And then there was another headline recently, in the BBC, and it was about, oh, it's one of the worst flu seasons for ages, and it's lots of children, particularly children, are getting this new strain of flu. Although there wasn't anything even in this scaremongering article, even then it didn't actually say any of the children thankfully had died from it. So it's just saying lots of children are getting bad flu. Okay, nasty, but it's people, children getting ill, sadly, then getting better and building up immunity. But it had still time to get vaccinated. And this also follows another recent exercise they've done in this country, similar to ones around the world, where again, like the old event, was it 201, the one they did pre-COVID in 2019 with Bill Gates involved. But there was another exercise with all these different government departments, what they would do if there was another pandemic. But the virus this time, which they used for the exercise, was some virus that was found in 1962 in California, but it particularly affects children. Most dangerous to children. So again, it seems that the child is being used to fearmonger their agendas, because that strikes, as it should do, really viscerally into people if children are threatened by something. So that will be, perhaps they might think that that's what they need to get the compliance, which they got still largely, but not 100%. And maybe now they need to pull out something extra, because more and more people, since all the lockdowns and everything else, with all things coming out about how what we knew at the start, that it was all lies, so much was all based on bullshit, and it was all there to control and damage us. But this all does link up, because, as I say, so much, and we know, of course, all the censorship that happened, still happening, but happened en masse then around 2020 and the years following it. The propaganda that came out and the disintegration of any level of truth. Truth wasn't allowed to come out. The fallout of that is still happening now. So I need to catch up. I don't know if this it's gone to the next stage yet, but there's a trial for Rainer Fulmich in Germany, who seems to be on these sort of trumped up charges about well, they're just coming out with some things about fraud, but he was illegally taken from Mexico to Germany. But he, as many of you will know, he and his colleagues had this Corona Investigative Committee, which was very prominent from 2020 onwards, and saw a lot of their videos. And they were he's a lawyer, but he had worked in the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry. But he had, a team of sort of big-minded people, whether it's scientists or lawyers, that sort of thing. But they were doing lots of analysis of, so many things around the lockdowns and the whole COVID, and really doing a good job of pulling apart a lot of it and showing it's nonsense. And he's someone that's being cracked down upon now. And then in Holland, Arno van Kessel, he was one of 2 lawyers leading a case representing 7 claimants who alleged harm from COVID injections. And they brought a case against a number of people, including Bill Gates and Albert Bourla, of the Pfizer CEO. But this guy, Van Kessel, on the eve of this case, was arrested by a load of law enforcement, some armed. Again, it's all right. They're letting everyone back on the YouTube now. Jason Burmas, David Icke. I'm fine. I just don't care anymore. But anyway, he's been alleged to be part of a criminal network planning violent acts, but without any evidence. No. Anyway. So yeah, the oft-quoted right to free speech has been dismantled. And of course, we see those people, institutions that call themselves liberal are the quickest and loudest to shout their message that censorship is good. It's important because to be allowed to question is dangerous. And many of these people have the temerity to accuse those campaigning against the destruction of civil rights as fascists. And our world is so clearly conforming to the blueprint written by Orwell over 70 years ago. Doublethink and Newspeak are all tools utilised daily. Language has been dumbed down, reduced to sound bites, memes, Twitter posts, and slogans. Repetition of the mind-controlled propaganda of our time burrows phrases into our minds so everyone spews them out as if they always have. Lockdown, previously confined to prisons. Stay safe, protect the NHS, clap for carers, stay home, till we're all bound with the new normal. This is what I wrote in 2020. Words have power. They can manipulate. They can take over minds. They can control and they can kill. And so can the denial of words. If people stay silent when they should speak out, language is at the center of this agenda, as it is to all human society. Through words, the propaganda machine manipulates and controls. An analogy of what is happening would be a crowded hall with many people where one person shouts fire, whether through malice or error, or perhaps they just have seen a very small flame, but the word is heard by others who panic, not seeing the fire, but fearing it anyway. They start to run and shout fire as well. So people start to scream as the panic spreads, and there is a stampede for the exits. Some people, the weakest, stumble, are pushed and fall to the floor, while others trample over them to try and save themselves. And the weak and unfortunate die because of fear from a word, not from smoke or fire. We've been told for months that the people around us, our friends, even our own families, are to be avoided and kept at a distance. This prohibition against singing in that crazy article contributes to the destruction of culture which the lockdown measures have caused. But to actually begin to suggest that speech itself, the way we communicate, can lead to death, can be infectious like a killer virus, is starting a process which, could it actually lead to some a world like my novel where actual speech is considered dangerous and vile? If we consider the word virus, this had already taken on a new meaning through computer software, again with Gates Central as head of Microsoft, as a stream of code, of data, that erodes text, erodes the strata of programs which hold together a creation from which a virtual construction is built. And now we have the present constructed virus. Again, I wrote this in 2020, with its web of words and symbols eroding the foundation of our existing view of reality. The propaganda and censorship obliterating words which are deemed wrong. The Fahrenheit 451 book burning of the digital age. Gates is now driving the vaccine agenda. His foundation investing billions to buy the influence of medical officials, governments, and media. The new experimental, maybe I should start going back to going or something like that. For the virus, for the first time, I understand RNA. So they're introducing synthetic messenger. All right, I've got to stop it. But There's that little image anyway. You can read that for yourself. So that's a HSBC Bank, and that was an advert on the tube and whatever from several years ago. And it's one of these things where they had a go at conspiracy theorists saying, we're not going to rewrite DNA. We're not going to rewrite how people's genetic code. But, you know, they're all back then. And again, this was put as an advert. So this is, oh, look, it's a great thing. Your DNA will be your data. And look, it's just going to be like that on your skin, like on your fingerprint. You're going to be a QR code. Like those kids, like all the kids that the NHS is going to like take on a DNA database and like digitally record them. So we're being written into their code, or that's what they want. So then they can write the narrative for us in another way to what they've been doing already, the powers that shouldn't be. But I suppose what they want to do, if they can, like the Matrix films, upload us in some way, and then maybe in their thinking, it's something that they can try to break out of this eternal creativity, the sublimity within language that writer was talking about in the Light newspaper. But being an optimist that I am, I also am with the guy who was writing in the Light. And that infinite creativity, whether it's the energy of some source energy that we can all tap into, and just something that's that spark that is within all of us, I still keep holding that we can use that, and we can battle against the bullshit, those who are trying to write our story for us and destroy our language, destroy our words, and take away what things mean. And we just need to get back to the real heart of what things were like, the real origin of language, the symbols, the creation of life out of nothing, and keep holding on to that, whatever. Green tea, what a great end line. We are all the descendants of the survivors. So yeah, thank you all for listening. I'm gonna go back and have a look at some comments here. Probably some of them from my wife. Dear. Yeah, so I mean, it is, again, it's crucial that language, because what we were talking about here, it's an exemplification of it. It's that we've been made to fear the words that we use, or we had to amend our own language to try and avoid being kicked off sites and being allowed to speak. So yeah, language is the crux of it all. So keep on being strong, people. Good that we can gather like this every now and then, and I hope you're all doing really well, and much love to all. Try and get another live stream in if I can before Christmas. If any of you haven't seen already, have a little look back at the Christmas special that I did 12 months ago on the origins of Christmas, and there might be a little origin of Christmas type thing coming out in a new format, but I don't know if I can fully say, but I think Liz has teased about it. But we might be putting out another nice little cross-media words and pictures thing about those pagan origins of Christmas and the light and dark, because it all comes from that winter solstice, the idea of light coming out of the darkest time of the year. And hi Mab, you've popped in right at the end, mate. Missed you too, Green Tea. Thanks so much for keeping with us and coming straight back as soon as I put up another live stream. You're right, Pete. Stay human and we'll run through. Yeah, keep strong, everyone. Lizzie's booth was just beautiful. Oh yeah, Lizzie's stalls are great. So we've got a couple more of those coming up this year. So keep checking out Liz's art. And if you want anything, if you're not in the vicinity of around where we are in Glastonbury, where we do the physical stalls, send us a message. And Liz is open to commissions and we can get things sent off. So yeah, give us all a shout. Keep in touch with us, my friends, and stay safe in the madness. Love to you all. Have a good rest of your night.